to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discuss today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am Managing Director at NIO Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. An indecisive on going to Norway, Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Good morning and good evening from my side. I am your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. This is episode number 64. Hope you had a nice May Labor Day holiday break and that you're not too grounded with the evolving COVID situation. You can, tell us what's going on the ground a little bit. But let me go through the headlines quickly. Some early April sales numbers are out. BYD is still killing it. The Chinese smart EV startup Big Three, especially NIO and Li Auto, took a major hit. That hit being an asterisk, right? And putting salt on the wound, NIO got on that list of companies on the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act by the SEC. And yet, CH Auto or Qiantu Motor is going against the headwind and trying to SPAC on the NASDAQ with this company called Mountain Crest. And more chatter on Tesla's second factory in Shanghai. And there's more. We'll talk about it. And Apple Car in the news again with that hiring of the Ford veteran. So the other way around. You want to talk about Beijing first a little bit, and then we go into the headlines?
Yeah, so I've gotten several over the last 2 weeks, inquiries, WeChats, WhatsApps, iMessages. So thank you for everyone who's checking in on me and my family. It's great to see that people are caring and wanting to know what's going on, because they see what's going on CNN and other media outlets and are a bit concerned. But Beijing is not anywhere close to where Shanghai is right now. Shanghai, effectively the entire city of 25 million people for the better part of the last month, have been on complete lockdown. So streets are empty, no cars are really driving, some delivery, emergency workers and things like that. But in Beijing, they're doing it much more surgically. And I hope Beijing has caught it a little bit earlier than Shanghai. So for instance, last week we had to do COVID tests every other day, and then they moved it to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So 3 consecutive days of COVID testing. So I've done that. And the boys and my wife are now going to school and working online. And so for you folks in the West, that's probably a little bit of deja vu, because how I feel, what happened with China is that they just kicked the can down the road about 2 years. And so we're still able to order food. Our Waimai or takeout is still pretty quick. It's slowed down a little bit, but not from an hour standpoint. And the grocery stores are still pretty full, and we're able to go to them. So again, thank you for everyone for checking in on us. I will update everyone. I think it's important that Lei and I update you all every week, from a manufacturing, production, and even to the brand level if we can, where we hear certain companies are doing better than others. You can see from sales results which companies are actually doing better than others. But, from a weekly basis, I think it's important for us to give you all an update on a weekly basis. But right now, I can go outside. The apps are very, very important, because if you don't get these tests, they won't let you in anywhere. So they are checking those.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is, I guess, Shanghai seems to be coming out of the worst of it.
Yes.
Right? It's the light at the end of the tunnel, whereas Beijing, I think in terms of cases, it's been hovering at around a few dozen every day, right, in the past couple of weeks. So it hasn't gone up. So you used the surgically word perfectly, in certain areas that there's been tighter restrictions, but you can't go to restaurants because restaurants are closed. You can still Waimai, you can still head outside, which is good. But
it's important for the kids, mental well-being, and especially when they're online all day long. So
but school is still online for at least this week.
So people are hopeful that it'll only be a couple of weeks. So Chinese, and you check me on this, Lei, international schools in China, they'll get out mid-June, and local Chinese schools won't get out until late June, early July. So I believe that we're just going to go online for the rest of the school year. My friends are hopeful that schools will open back up before the end of the year, but we're only talking a month. And I think American schools, and this is where I want you to check me, they get out end of May, early June, Lei?
Yeah, usually a little bit earlier.
So this is kind of the state of where we are. What's important to also understand, and Lei, you help me fill in the blanks. In Beijing, Mercedes builds, Hyundai builds, and let's include Tianjin as well. So what other brands are building in Beijing, Lei? Are those the only two major foreign automakers that are really building cars in Beijing?
Yeah, that's pretty much Mercedes, Hyundai, and Tianjin, Toyota.
Right, that's right.
Some Chinese brands, BAIC, are in Beijing.
And for those wondering why I included Tianjin, is because it's about a half an hour train ride from Beijing. So if we want to, and COVID, there's no borders for COVID, right? So it's probably just easier to include Tianjin because it's also an automotive hub.
Regionally, the Jingjinji, which is the Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei cluster, is becoming a kind of a regional, important, location.
It's an automotive center. Sort of. It's an automotive center,
right? And I heard, I don't remember the company or entity that was moving to. What's that city where Baidu is testing outside of
Yizhuang?
No, not Yizhuang, in Hebei province.
Hebei.
That new town.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. I forget too.
My Chinese is getting worse.
Oh man, you're so American now, dude. Watching too much sports.
So which company do you want to go into first? You want to talk about Tesla? Get Tesla out of the way?
Let me piggyback off your Jing Jin Ji statement because the central government is planning to make that area, and there's about 130 to 150 million people in that area, Hebei, Beijing, and Tianjin, combining that into this mega city. That's their grand scheme.
Xiongwan?
Yes.
I just remembered it.
Yeah. That's right. And so they are planning to turn that area into a mega city of over 100 million people. And it's going to be the mother of all urban planning and transportation planning, public transportation projects, full stop. And so that's still going to happen, but obviously daily life takes over. But let's talk BYD and then Leap, who
sales a little bit.
Yeah.
BYD is in a league of its own. There's nothing more to say. They're looking good so far. On trajectory for at least 1.2 million, if not 1.5. If they don't hit a snag, I think they're well on their way. Look for even higher numbers in May and June. And I think Shenzhen handled it pretty well, right? When they had that first wave, almost 2 months ago, maybe? And now they're right. My friend, he quarantined in Shenzhen for 3 weeks and went back to Beijing. So,
but technically,
BYD is really,
Shenzhen, they had the official lockdown, right? But there was also, before that official lockdown, there were areas that had been locked down for weeks prior.
The only thing I'll say about BYD in a negative sense is, remember, they're expanding both their vehicle production capacity as well as battery all over China, right? You've seen those numbers, whatever gigawatt hours that are planned, that are being opened. This is good and bad, right? Because it puts you kind of, speaking of the COVID outbreak, there's a little bit of risk involved in that, but they have to do it.
These are the types of decisions that the management have to make, right? If I double down, so it's the opposite of a Tesla, where they double down in Shanghai. The reason Tesla doubled down is because
we'll go in there.
Yeah,
a little bit.
We'll get into that, but BYD did the opposite, right? We want to diversify. We want to build in other parts of China, and the reason they would do that is because if there's a lockdown in Shenzhen a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, their entire operation would be crippled. But if they diversify, then they can still build, they can still manufacture. But there's the other risk, right? And so these are the pluses and minuses that all the management teams are thinking about. And think of it from a standpoint of not only in China, but globally. Okay, if I build in Eastern Europe, it's much cheaper, but guess what? There's a war in the Ukraine now, and so there's risk there where there wasn't risk 2 years ago. And then Southeast Asia in 2012, there was a huge tsunami in Thailand, right, in Japan. And so there's all these considerations that need to be made. And when you make them in the immediate future, it could be, it's paying off dividends. It's great. But then the world happens, daily life happens, natural disasters happen, and then you run into these shortcomings that your decision 5 years ago turns out. So it's just really hard to make the right quote unquote decisions. So I think BYD is still crushing it. Leap Motor, they were only down 10%. So
yeah, Leap Motor was actually that bad. And the other news on Leap Motor that was big this week was the C2C, cell to chassis, that they announced, similar to the Tesla's structural pack 4680, right? That's something that only a few have announced. And but I think this will be temporary. Let's see how NIO and Li Auto recovers in May. I don't think it will be returned to 100% normal. I said, I think last episode, that it would take roughly the entire second quarter to kind of get back on track. So expect to see continued, if we only talk about rankings, I tweeted that the rankings are meaningless given the current situation, but it wouldn't be surprising to see NIO and Li Auto still kind of behind somebody else, whereas they used to lead in the rankings.
And we have to also take into consideration the level of focus of the big three, Li Auto, XPeng, and NIO, because they have to. So for NIO in particular, they have 2 new vehicles that are launching later this year and a new factory. Degree of difficulty is off the charts when it comes to managing the pandemic. Okay, Li Auto. So really quickly, Li Auto, they only had 1 car. They've been building it for over 2 years. They're really good at it. So getting the second one is more than doubling the degree of difficulty for them. And for XPeng, it's the G9. And they're also going to be building it in their own factory. So degree of difficulty is high. Exactly.
And that's exactly the same comment made from an internal source from NIO. It's a person with the XPT, the motor, in-house motor. And he said, it's the NIO Park is right now it's on track, but it's very difficult. So,
and I'm in complete agreement with you, Lei, that May is not going to be, even with zero COVID, May is not going to get to 100% because they're learning on the go and they're trying to figure out and bulletproof the closed loop, the processes for COVID testing, and make sure the testing services get back the data in real time so that people can be quarantined if they need to be quarantined right away, that they're not working for several hours, potentially contaminating other people and the facilities. So May could be the turning point if the numbers can keep going down, okay? Because stabilizing is one thing, but the numbers ultimately need to go down. And just so we have a better understanding of how far they went down, the sales numbers from March to April. Li Auto was down 62%, XPeng was down 42%, NIO was down 49%, and GAC Ion was down 50%. So pretty significant numbers, and it matches with the legacy autos that we saw last week. They were also down 40 and 50%. So I'm talking about the BMWs and the Mercedes and things like that. So across the board, high double digit sales reductions. So
yeah, and NIO, if you look at their numbers, they just had their 200,000 vehicle produced, and at the end of April, their cumulative delivery numbers were nearly 198,000. So you can figure out how much we're in inventory. Not much. So they still have all these orders to fulfill, and it's tough.
And it's tough. And it's important to explain that if you're smart or you want to think ahead, you're pushing your supplier to build ahead when they're able to. And then you're hoarding those parts, right? Because in a just-in-time environment, you would normally run out of parts within a week. And so if they're able to keep going, they're slowing down the line. So that's one thing. But then if you hoard parts, it takes capacity out of the system and then increases the price of the rest of the parts. And so when we're talking about supply chain challenges causing pricing increases, it's not just raw material. It's also this effectively an artificial increase in price because more people are building ahead and hoarding parts, which takes out. If Lei seating supplier normally builds 10 seats for Li Motor Company and Lei Motor Company, but then I tell him and I take all 20, there's no capacity to build for Lei Motor Company. And so now he has to charge more in order to get Lei Motor Company his 10 seats, right? So I think understanding that, so it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy, like this vicious cycle that increased costs, right?
And we haven't seen the Tesla numbers, but Tesla numbers in terms of percentage reduction from March is going to be huge, I think. Probably they were at least 50,000 units.
Yep.
If you look at March, which is artificially high because it's end of the quarter, but still a month on month, it probably would not look good. But at least we can go to Tesla a little bit. Tesla is still getting that love, and I think they're still in this honeymoon phase with Shanghai, and they're getting a lot of support based on the Reuters article, the letter, and
the people we talked to.
So and so the latest chatter just now I've heard of the second plan, which is roughly another 450,000 capacity. You can call it a second plan. You can call it phase 2. It's to the south of the current plan. But the latest chatter is, get ready, the second plan is only a appetizer. The main course I'm hearing could be a third plant still in Shanghai. Okay.
Hey, Lei.
I don't know whether you've heard about this, but this is the latest chatter I've heard, and they're probably betting on Shanghai.
I have heard this, and I'm coining it right now. Lingang area is going to be Lingang district or Lingang area is going to be called. I'm calling it Tesla City now. Boom, right there. It's going to be called Tesla City, and I just coined it. But no, I'm hearing the same thing.
So that's
for those that are Tesla enthusiasts. You should listen and read some of those articles out there. I wrote about it in the newsletter. The amount of bending over backwards that the local authorities had to undertake in order to get thousands of Tesla workers back to the factory, clean the factory, monumental. I've never, ever heard of China bending over backwards for a company like that. Or, whether it's Shanghai, whether it's Beijing, whether it's Shenzhen or Guangzhou or whatever. I've never heard of this. And so this is so Tesla is doubling and tripling down.
The eventual capacity based on that chatter is that in Shanghai alone, it will get to 2 million potentially.
Tesla City.
Yeah, that's mind-boggling.
So think of...
It's only a tenth of their 2030 target.
Yeah, so they're going to run out of land in Tesla City, and they're going to have to build capacity outside of Shanghai in order to get to that 20 million number. Full stop. So
you bet.
Go ahead.
Different cities are courting Tesla right now.
I would think that I would think that Jilin province is just chomping at the bit, right? Because it's already an automotive hub, and Beijing is probably also, and there would be reasons for Tesla to build factory in Beijing, right? Keep those government relations up, because as you know, whether you're headquartered in Shanghai, you're multinational headquartered in Shanghai, most of your team's in Shanghai, you also have an office in Beijing, and that office is called government relations.
Well, isn't Tesla also setting up a R&D entity?
Yes.
That's still in progress, I think, in Beijing.
But this is where I'm confused. Like, are they building two, one in Shanghai and Beijing then? Because I remember that they had also said that they were building a technical center in Shanghai. But the deep ties between Tesla and Shanghai and writ large China over the next several years, they're going to get deeper. So, and aside to this Tesla 2 million units, CATL also had made an announcement that they're going to try to build 670 gigawatt hours of capacity
I saw that.
by 2025. So just for the sake of context, in 2021, they had 170 gigawatt hours of capacity. CATL plans on raising 45 billion RMB. So if you're wondering right now I can buy 7 RMB with $1. 6.5 or 6.6. So I can buy 6.5 RMB for $1. So 45 billion is about $6 or $7 billion US they're planning to raise in order to support the increase in capacity. Okay. And if we piggyback that off of that CATL announcement, off of what Mary said this week, that they're building 4 plants in the United States, Ohio, Lansing, Tennessee, and what was the other one? I forget. But they're building 4 factories that will build battery cells with LG, right? So everybody's building more capacity. And I will drop a little breadcrumb here, Lei. The person that we spoke to about 2.5 weeks ago said that there's not enough raw materials for all the capacity that's being forecasted to be built, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be, so raw material prices over the long term should increase.
And so much about China leading the battery. So CATL, 600 whatever gigawatt hours. Remember, many episodes ago, we meant SVolt, which is the kind of the subsidiary of Great Wall Motor, but quite independent. They were planning something, was it 400 gigawatt hours by a certain year?
I think it was 450 or something, right?
I mean, yeah. Remember, right? We talked about it. I mean, you add those two together, it's 1T, isn't it? And Tesla alone, I think they mentioned, was it in their battery day, something of terawatt hours of, right?
We're getting to a lot of zeros. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
And remember that CATL, I believe they said that 20% of their revenue came from Tesla. So they're planning on growing together. 80% of global capacity, the increases in capacity is going to be LFP batteries. So, but if we look at the current market share, CATL is about 35% globally for Q1 of 2022. Next is going to be LG, okay, at about 12%. And then BYD also has 11 or 12%. So this creates huge opportunities for BYD's Blade battery, right? Because if CATL is supplying you batteries in China, you probably don't want all your eggs in one basket. And so you want a dual source always, so you as the customer have a little more leverage, right? Because if you single source such an important commodity, CATL's got you over a barrel, and they can dictate terms, pricing, supply to you. Okay, so you never, as an OEM or a customer, ever want to be in that position with a supplier. So if you look at Calb, if you look at Goshen, from the Chinese standpoint, right, these guys have huge opportunities to take share because number one, the pie is growing.
Mm-hmm.
The pie is growing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Goshen, by the way, so still that mystery 200 kilowatt hour with this American automaker that we've been speculating on. And by the way, Goshen is also supplying VinFast.
Yes.
And some others. So they also have this huge capacity planned, or these wins, right? Planned. So that's another huge number. Should we go to NIO quickly, because 2 consecutive announcements. So one, the response to the list.
Yep, delisting.
Delisting, and just this morning, the Singapore
secondary
list. What does that tell you about the possibility of delisting from New York? And what's your take?
Well, I think it's a stare down right now. And I think in the past, the United States government would always concede. And so the Chinese government is just waiting for the US government, whether it's the SEC, to fold. I don't think they're going to do it this time. I think they're going to hold firm. And I think because right now, they're both posturing, right? The SEC is every week they add 20 companies, they add 30 companies, they add 80 companies. And so total, I think there's over 200. And again, in the past, we have to remember that the United States, every 8 years, the president changes. And so attitudes change. And so the long-term attitude towards these exceptions that the Chinese companies have, because that's what they are, they're exceptions. They're getting special treatment. Okay. So let's be clear on that. And the United States is just requesting that they get the same type of access that they get for most other companies that are traded in the US, publicly traded companies in the US. And the Chinese government is saying, well, based on national security, we can't open our books up completely for X companies, right? And so I don't believe that the United States is going to blink on this. And I think that's also why NIO is effectively mitigating risk, right? Because they want liquidity, they want this access to capital, right?
So you would say that this response and the Singapore listing could be a sign they're preparing in the, I believe, still unlikely event that they'll delist. Because to me, this has seemed to be formality more than anything else, right? Because NIO does say that they will abide to whatever the existing rules in place, right? So far this year, the share prices have basically, it's almost near 52-week lows.
Sure. So the market is believing that they're going to get delisted, right? Based on everything else, in addition to this delisting potential, right?
Yeah, but I still think that this is too early. It's still a bit too early. This is all the formalities that are going.
Did you also see that Hikvision and Dahua might also be put on a more extreme sanctions list?
Yeah. So, we're not trying to single out NIO here, but just the whole narrative, right? The whole geopolitical, the U.S.-China
and
relations, all of this. And yet, Qiantu is still wanting to SPAC on NASDAQ.
Head scratcher. But let me, 500,000 foot level, as domestic companies, you can be U.S. domestic or whatever, right? But the U.S. markets are obviously the largest, and you can get the most liquidity out of the U.S. markets. But as Chinese companies or Asian companies in general, they want access to the USD, right? Because that's kind of the fiat currency for the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's important as they go global to have access to USD. It's harder to access the global markets if you're only using RMB, right? So there's specific reasons for these companies to do that. It's not a prestige thing. It's not a market cap thing only, right? There's also practical financial transactions that are easier if you're able to utilize multiple currencies. And so there's a lot of different reasons to be traded on a U.S. market, on a U.S. exchange. The Qiantu, do you know the history of this company, Lei?
Yeah.
Okay, let's educate us, please.
Quickly, the history. So there's 2 companies, right? There's CH Auto. So in Chinese, Changcheng Huaguan transliterally means Great Wall China Crown. But their English name is CH Auto. Right. So the C and H are the initials, right? Changchun Huaguan. So yeah, this is a company started by Lu Qun in 2003. So ironically, the same year that Tesla started. And the CH Auto is kind of a design engineering house, Chinese domestic design and engineering house, started by Lu Qun, who graduated from Tsinghua University's automotive engineering.
Right.
So this is a traditional car guy. And his CV says that he submitted thousands of patents. Okay, and they've done work for companies, design work, engineering work for companies like Geely. And then he started this Qiantu Motor, Qiantu meaning future, right? Qiantu Motor in 2015, and they were actually one of the earliest to get the license, the EV production license. I think they were number 6 of the initial 15 that got the NDRC and MIIT production license back in 2016, I believe.
Qiantu is an OG. Qiantu is an OG.
Yeah, so, and they launched this K50 electric, China's electric sports car, super sports car, in 2018, August, selling for well over 600,000 RMB. And to date, I guess less than 150 units have been sold. Okay, so it's been 4 years since the launch, almost 4 years.
Let me explain the Qiantu K50 a little bit. So it's a 2-seat or 4-seat? I think it's 2-seat, right?
It's a 2-seat.
So two-door coupes around the world is very niche, and it's the same way in China. The K50 is a 2-door sports car, not very big, and performance-wise, not very amazing. Okay, so for $100,000, you get a middle-of-the-road 2-door coupe sports car. That was so to launch a 2-door into a market of SUV, into a market that dominates with SUVs, was kind of a head scratcher. And then in Sanlitun, and you probably visited when you lived here.
Sure.
They had, so Sanlitun is effectively, what's a good, it's like not Times Square, but
Times Square. You can say it's Times Square.
Yeah, so it is where all of the retail locations, Adidas had the largest store in the world in Sanlitun. It's closed now for renovations, but so we're talking Apple Store, everything. They have a Intercontinental Hotel there. There's a boutique hotel called the Opposite House. So Qiantu opened a retail store / bookstore / coffee shop there. This was in 2019?
Yeah, 2019.
And I went in there because, that's what I do. And I kicked the tires and I looked at it and I was like, the dragonfly on the hood was crooked. The door for the charging unit, that was a little bit loose, and it was cheap plastic. It was like molded plastic, and you could tell that the plastic didn't, or the paint on the plastic didn't hold as well on the sheet metal. And so it was like almost like 2 different sheens, 2 different colors. And I'm like, man, and I hadn't heard any good news about this company. And so it was like a Leap motor, right? You just heard about it, you saw a couple of them, but you only saw a couple of them because you lived in Beijing, right? In any other smaller city in China, you're not going to see any of them. So yeah, and they've been dead for 18 months.
First of all, the product was disaster, I think, both in terms of positioning and offering this model at that price, but then what you described is exactly one of the biggest reasons why it's failed. And later on, I think they faced, not paying their employees. Suppliers were, asking for payment, and even this guy, he got onto one of those lists where you're restricted to consumption list. What do you call that, right?
Yeah.
And then I think he used his personal, I guess, connections to ask for his Tsinghua, schoolmates for this supposedly round T financing.
Right.
And they even launched a round T RT edition of the K50 that these schoolmates could own. And then culminating with this announcement with the SPAC based in New York, which is also the CEO is a Chinese, Dr. Su-Ying Liu.
Who's on his fifth SPAC?
Yeah, the company last year merged with Playboy. If you look at their website. So I don't know where this is
Let me also fill in some blanks here, Lei, from a Western standpoint. So they had so CH Auto in China is positioned as a consultancy, right? It's a design house, but blanket term, it's a consultancy. And so Qiantu, so CH was selling licensing to the Qiantu brand and product to Western to Western companies. And there's a company called HAAH, that they were working with in California. Ha was like a dealership conglomerate, but they were trying to move upstream. And I believe that fell through because Ha couldn't get the financing. And
they were trying to bring in the Exceed from Chery, but that didn't
So
work
Ha was basically carpet bombing, trying to find a Chinese EV maker to license their technology so they could produce it in the United States. That fell through. And I believe Mullen then moved in to license the Qiantu, but rebadge it, right? It's not called the Qiantu. It's called something else. And 2 episodes ago, I believe you had mentioned to everyone that Mullen had a Hindenburg short report dropped on it last month. So, and then we joked around. I remember 2 or 3 episodes ago, we joked around that every single US EV entity has had some sort of investigation into its finances. And so it's a head scratcher.
It's a head scratcher also in a way that if you look at Qiantu, if you look at WAM, these 2 CEOs and founders are traditional car guys. So you would think that, right, that they could do it better. But it's the IT guys, it's the William Lees, it's the He Xiaopengs, it's the Li Xiangs that are making it.
I've been thinking about that, Lei. I've been thinking about that. Maybe it's the auto guys that just can't get that type of capital, right? Because tech capital is 2, 3, 4, 5x what typical auto capital might be. Okay, so I'm speculating, right? But
the K50, right, the product wise, too niche, quality is too bad. And now they're trying to launch the K20, which is even more unorthodox model.
They Frankenstein.
It's hard to describe what it is.
A bunch of different designs together, right? Because they wanted to diversify the product portfolio. Try to make it more attractive for the SPAC, probably.
And at the end of the day, right, Lou said, for tech companies, NASDAQ is still the first priority if you want to go IPO. And obviously, capital is what they need. Money is what they need. And I feel like this is kind of the last hurrah of Qiantu.
Let me also...
They're not dead, but...
Let me also provide some unofficial color. I received their pitch deck over a year ago. So they've been, I mentioned that they've been trying to raise money for the last 15 or 18 months. And it's not great. I'm sure it's changed since then. But and for those that are wondering, Tsinghua is like China's MIT. So it's the best engineering school in China. A lot of smart guys have started companies, technology companies here in China, graduates of Tsinghua. So think MIT. And so I'll also say that I was approached by some SPAC owners over the last several months to help them find a Chinese technology company to SPAC into. And they were like, we're targeting X to Y valuation, right? This is the window we're looking at. And I reached out to a couple companies, and even companies that most people on this podcast would recognize, they were all hesitant to do any type of Western IPO. And so for Qiantu to go through, or CH Auto more appropriately to go through with this, it just seems kind of like a money grab, to be quite frank. And so, because those SPAC owners, I believe it's a year old, they have 2 years to find a company to merge with, or they have to give that money back. So maybe they're getting a little bit desperate as well. But China company, China tech company, those two things and a SPAC are like oil and water right now. So oil and vinegar. So that's why it's weird.
Now, my conclusion is, one, I can't see this being successful. And two, I can't see the products being successful, especially consider the current environment and competition. So I don't think this is going anywhere, except for whatever you want to call it, PR.
And I got to say this.
I've never been negative. I've always tried to be positive, but I
got to say this.
I respect the guy. I respect Lu Jin. He's spoken at our conference before, back in the days. But
this is his baby, right? So maybe he's getting desperate. This is his baby, right? So I'm just
the reality is not everyone's going to survive, and we can't have everybody be successful.
They're targeting a $1.75 billion valuation, and that's a little bit more than what Faraday is going for right now on the public markets.
Yeah. Well, yesterday was Fisker, today was Lucid, the American EV startups. I think share some interesting numbers, right? Yeah. Fisker is actually trying to triple their planned production in 2024 to 150,000 units. And one interesting thing that was shared on the call, I think, was in addition, they have a deal with CATL, right, on the LFP version of the Ocean. I think they are also talking to other suppliers as well. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. And they talked a little bit about Foxconn and Lordstown Motors. They talked about PEAR, and then Fixer said PEAR is PEAR to the auto industry is what the iPhone is to the cell phone industry. That's what he said.
Jeez.
But he also said no deals or talks with Apple.
I believe that Fisker, if they can work with Foxconn very closely, because they're taking a risk, right? Because Foxconn, they don't have a lot of deep experience building cars. They have zero experience building cars in the US, and they were pretty savvy by buying out Lordstown Motors for pennies on the dollar for that Lordstown factory, and then renting back factory floor space for Lordstown to build their own car. I mean, that's genius. How do you do that? I'm gonna buy this at pennies on the dollar, and then I'm gonna lease back floor space so you can build your car. That's awesome. But there's just no at that price point, right? Because GM is still at least 2 years away from launching a Blazer, launching any type of mass market EV. So Fisker has blue ocean for foreseeable future. Can they get launched on time in the right quality? I think there's a huge opportunity for them.
Yeah, so they reiterated November 17th, 2022 as the SOP, still on track. So they've got more than, what's the number they gave? 45,000 orders of the Ocean. And then Lucid basically said, 360 delivered in Q1, and their production target or production guidance is 12,000 to 14,000. That's roughly 2.9 billion
by the end of this year
revenues. Yeah. So
wow.
But considering this is a model that's selling $150,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's a pretty good production number for them. If they can hit 14,000 units by the end of the year, I think that's pretty significant.
Lower than what they had before. 20,000, I think, was before.
And you saw Sasquatch, right? You saw Rivian, 2 of them at your neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
Your hood, right?
Yeah. It's crazy. So I can feel that. I've seen quite a few Ioniq 5 already. I see Teslas every day. So even in this small town, right? So EVs are coming.
Oh, and let me bring up two quick points in my newsletter that I thought were pretty interesting. First of all, Singapore. For those that aren't familiar with Singapore, it's very expensive to purchase a vehicle in Singapore. So the example that the article that I read gave was that the Tesla Model 3, made in China Tesla Model 3, by the way, is about $55,000 US to purchase in Singapore. Not bad, whatever. But the COE, the Certificate of Entitlement, which is effectively the license plate, is $63,000 US to purchase. So to buy a Tesla Model 3, made in China Model 3, is about $120 US right now. So imagine, and the engine size and the weight of the vehicle determines how expensive the COE is. So it's not a flat fee. And so if you buy an S-Class, we're talking probably close to $300,000 US to buy that vehicle. But they have ambitions to be 100% electric by 2040. Okay, and they buy about 100,000 cars a year. So they are going to reduce the COE cost for EVs. So if people are wondering where Tesla or ShanghaiGiga is going to export to now that Berlin Giga is up and running, look to Singapore, look to Australia, look to Japan, look to Korea to take more units from ShanghaiGiga. And another interesting thing that is worth us keeping track of at a distance lay is Tata Motors has said this week that they're going to be getting into chip manufacturing or fab, and they're going to get into battery cell manufacturing. Okay, so how did CATL take that? Because the reality with India is that there's 1.5 billion people, but it's a messy democracy. There's still a bit of corruption, and the infrastructure is not anywhere close to where it needs to be to take four-wheel. So the vehicle of choice in India predominantly is the two-wheeled petrol moped. Okay, they have companies that are launching left and right that are selling electric mopeds. Ola being right. the most noticeable, but Gogoro has partnered with Hero, the largest moped manufacturer, and licensed their platform. So they're going to be. So if you're wondering where else battery swapping will work, it'll probably work in India on two wheels. But there have been numerous battery fires on these mopeds, and everyone that lives in China knows when they've driven into an underground parking structure, there are signs all over the place that say you cannot park a moped in the parking structure, underground parking structure. This is the exact reason, because maybe a NIO, maybe a Xiaomi one? Xiaonyo, and then 8, is it 8? Anyways, but these higher end ones, they're going to be, their quality and reliability is world class, so they can ship all over the world. But there are a lot of Chinese brands that would never pass quality, reliability standards in Europe or the United States. Those are the ones that you worry about. And India's the same way. So they see this gold rush on clean energy vehicles, mopeds. And there's a lot of these companies that aren't putting the level of scrutiny necessary on engineering and validation. And there's putting these basically prototypes on the road. We're seeing a lot of fires now. And there's a survey recently, I forget who did it, about Indian consumers and whether or not they'd be open to buying an electric moped. 2% said within the next 6 months, I'd be open to buying an electric moped. They were all like, it's dangerous. I wouldn't put my family on that thing. And so if we take into consideration the error rate for that survey, it's effectively zero. So there's no demand for electric mopeds in India, which is heartbreaking, because Beijing in 2014, 2015, the pollution was absolutely horrible. You remember this. It's worse in India.
Yeah.
It's worse in India now in certain cities. And so it's heartbreaking that they're not able to sort things out in the short term anyways, right? Long term, it'll play out, but there's still a ton of dirt roads in many parts of India where having a moped, let alone a Tesla Model 3, is probably impractical. And so a lot of different things going on in India, but 1.5 billion people, we've seen it. If they're all pushing in the same direction and the governments are super supportive, man, things can happen quickly.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.